My mother, stepfather, grandma, brother, and 2 sisters live in a house by Lake Draper in Oklahoma. They have neighbors, but the area they live in is kind of rural. A couple of days ago, my mom was going through her phone and found 3 pictures. One of her sleeping, one of my stepfather sleeping, and one of my youngest sisters sleeping. They were taken at the beginning of April, around 3 in the morning. She has no history of sleepwalking, and every other family member has denied having anything to do with the photos. I know my family very well, and they wouldn't do something like that. I also have doubts that any of them would be awake at that time. I'm just curious if any of you have experienced anything similar, or have a reasonable explanation. I should also note that they have 5 dogs, all of which will bark at anything and everything. Because of that, we're confident it wasn't an intruder. Any advice or suggestions are welcome. I worked as a bartender for about 5 years. I would usually get out around 3 a.m., 4 a.m. on weekends. One bar I worked at was next to a small portion of the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. It was a Saturday night. Some of my friends would usually hang out with me at the bar until I got out. We were all talking, and I was moving some just clean glasses around. I randomly looked outside and saw 2 red dots in the woods, about maybe 4 inches apart from each other, but evenly leveled. So I'm staring at these things thinking, what the heck are those? When all of a sudden, the 2 dots rose up about 7 feet in the air, and I could see that they were probably eyes, because I saw a silhouette shape of something crouching underneath them when it suddenly stood tall. It was blacker than the darkness around it in the woods, so it was the darkest thing I've ever seen. Suddenly, it turned to its left and started walking further into the woods. Of course, none of my friends saw it. I didn't have time to point it out, so they don't believe me, but I know what I saw. I really, fervently, don't believe in the Jersey Devil. After this encounter, I remember my 7th grade science teacher told me about actually someone interacting with a Bigfoot-esque creature in South Jersey. I also read some stories similar to mine in an issue of Weird New Jersey magazine, taking place on Delsea Drive, on a stretch of about 50 miles. They had reported red eyes as well. I've heard countless stories of this happening in one way or another with other children, and wanted to see if it's happened to anyone here. When my daughter was around 4, she began to talk about the last time. She'd say things like, "Yeah, but that's what happened last time, not now. When I was older than you, not when you were my mom." When talking about things she remembered, one day, we were sitting on my bed, having a random conversation before bedtime. She said something like, "But I was your grandma then. I died before you were born, so I wanted to meet you. When your sister died, I had to wait until you had a daughter. I was a twin, but my twin was stillborn. My sister never even took a breath. My daughter had no idea. There's no way she could have known that at 4 years old. Just putting it out there. There are countless studies of children remembering things from past lives. My kid did, for sure." This is the first time I'm actually writing about this. So when I was 13, my older brother, who was 18, and I were on our way to a movie when we were hit by a drunk driver. I woke up in the hospital 4 days later, having lost my right leg and other leg in a cast, along with other injuries. That night, I woke up to my brother sitting by my bed, telling me everything will be okay, and to go back to sleep. The next day, my parents came to visit and see how I was doing. I asked why my brother wasn't with them, and they just looked at each other, but didn't say anything. That night, I again woke up to my brother sitting by my bed, and telling me he knows I can get through this, and I need to be strong and overcome this, and not let my injuries stop me from living life. We talked a bit, with him not answering specific questions, but answering more general ones. I remember asking him why he was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, and because that was very unlike him to wear anything similar to what he did the day before. He didn't answer that, but when I asked how he was, he said he was better than he thought he would be, given the circumstances. He reminded me to be strong and to keep living and not let anything stop me, and how much he loved me, before telling me I should get some more sleep. The next day, my parents again came to visit me in the hospital, and I again asked why my brother wasn't with them, and again, they looked at each other, and it was only after I said that I would like my family to visit together and not at different times, that my dad asked what I meant. I told him Andy had been coming at night to visit. My mom broke down and left the room. My dad then told me that that was impossible, because Andy had died in the accident, almost instantly. I didn't believe it and argued, and ended up having to be sedated. That night, I had no visit, and the next day, my parents brought a newspaper article about the accident. My granddad was diagnosed with Parkinson's and then Alzheimer's, approximately 4 years prior to his passing at 78 years old. For the year prior, he lost his ability to walk, use his arms and talk, acknowledge those around him, and respond to his environment. Basically, his soul was trapped inside his body, watching us all, but unable to speak to us. My grandma became his sole caregiver. They set up a harness system in the home to move him from room to room, for showering and to use the bathroom, and bed and lounge room time. She would bathe him, feed him, and anything else he needed. She vowed to be by his side until he died. They shared a bed their entire life, and that never changed, even when he was sick. One night, prior to his passing, something eerie happened. My grandma was doing her usual routine of reading a newspaper to my granddad, as it was his favorite thing when he was able to read. Out of nowhere, my grandma was overcome with an eerie feeling. She wasn't sure what it was. A few minutes later, my granddad spoke. He turned his head, looked at her and said, "I love you, Shirley." In disbelief, my grandma said, Ken, what did you say?" That was all. He then stopped eating, refused food, and died within a week in his favorite armchair. He never visually recognized anyone during his last year, so for him to look at my grandma and also speak was a miracle. I believe his internal spirit was able to overpower the disease to communicate one last time, before passing and becoming free. My grandma cherishes this moment, and I am thankful it happened. I think she feels valued for being there for him, and not putting him in a home. I believe they'll be reunited one day, and he will be there for her. Quick background. When I was younger, I was a very sick child, constantly in and out of the hospital. At 2.5, I contracted pertussis encephalopathy, basically an infection to the brain. I was having seizure after seizure. My siblings were brought in to say goodbye to me before I was being transported to another hospital. They were told they'd never see me again. On the way in the ambulance, my heart stopped 3 times. On the 3rd, they thought they lost me, but managed to bring me back after a few minutes. My parents were told I had a 50-50 chance, but that if I lived, I'd be in a vegetative state. Spoiler alert, I was neither, and managed to come out of it absolutely fine. The doctors said they never saw someone come out of what I did, and to this day, talk about it when I see them. Now, here's where it gets weird. Fast forward to when I'm 3, fully recovered, and we, as a family, are going through family photos. I point out one of my grandmother, who died years before I was born, and say, "There's Nanny Collins." My family were shocked because there's no photos of her around the house, and I'd never been shown one. There was no way I knew what she looked like. Curious, they asked me how I knew that, and I replied, I was up in her house playing with Anne. They asked me if I met my cousin Annie, who's my age. I tell them no, not Annie, Anne. At this point, they're freaked out. My cousin Annie is named after her aunt Anne, who died when she was 1.5 years. There is no way I knew about this, because she died 30 years before this incident. Then I said the thing that struck them the most. I tell them, I was playing with Anne and her toys, but Nanny Collins told me I have to go home to Mommy and Daddy, that I wasn't ready to stay yet. I truly believe that I died, and went to whatever kind of afterlife there is, but my grandmother saved me. It explains how I came out of what I did, when my chances were literally death or living dead. For a few years after this, I still spoke of my Nanny Collins, and told my family that whenever I was sad, she would come and cheer me up. I would go to her grave and talk to her like we were having conversations. Then, one day, I told them that she said I didn't need her anymore, and after that day, I never spoke of her again. I truly believe that my nanny was there for me through my tough childhood years. I sadly don't remember these things because I suspect she stopped showing to me when I was old enough to remember. I wish I did remember, but all my family members do. Even my aunts and uncles talk about this and how I spoke about her all the time. So, Nanny Collins, thank you for saving my life.